This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 453, Urban Institute. On today's show, we're talking about Urban Institute, what they do, and how they use Drupal, with guest Josh Miller. We'll also cover Access Unpublished as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guest today is Josh Miller. Josh is the Director of Web Development at Urban Institute, an organization founded by President Lyndon B. Johnson to provide power through knowledge and address pressing social and economic issues. With over 2 decades of experience, Josh is passionate about open source, accessibility, and mentorship, having actively contributed to the Drupal community since 2008, Drupal 6. Outside of work, Josh enjoys spending time with his family and cats, lawn care, and Legos. Josh, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on here, guys.
It's funny. It's like you listen to the podcast with lawn care and Legos. Those are Nick and I's passions outside of podcasting.
I feel like there's a Venn diagram, and those topics are all in there with Drupal somehow.
Yeah. I'm John Picozzi, Solutions Architect at EPAM, and today my co-hosts are joining us for the next 4 weeks. Randy Fay, Lead Maintainer for DDev. Randy is an old Drupal hack and an old hack in general, he says, who has ended up maintaining DDev these many years. He loves helping people out with local development and website trouble and has quite a life of bike packing. Randy, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Great to see you all.
What exactly is bike packing? Is it exactly that, backpacking with a bike?
Well, it's traveling by bike. Traveling by bike might be bike traveling or bike touring or bike packing.
And actually,
I can't believe you didn't mention, Randy, that you are also a recipient of the Aaron Winborn Award.
Yeah, I feel like if Amy June were here, that would have been the first thing that we mentioned. Yes, Randy is a new recipient, we should say, of the Aaron Winborn Award. He won at this year's
Pittsburgh
last year's
DrupalCon. Dating myself, sorry, Mike Anello.
They all merged together.
But yeah, I feel like that definitely we gotta work that in there. An award-winning hack, maybe. I don't know.
It was such an amazing honor to receive such a beautiful honor from the amazing thing to me about the Drupal organization having like their key honor being something about community is just beautiful, just a lovely thing.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And last but not least in our cavalcade of introductions, Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development. How's it going, Nick?
Happy to be here, but I am not the last one to be introduced, but happy to be here.
And now, to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a growing number of Drupal modules and recipes of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, John. Have you ever wanted to get feedback on unpublished content from people who aren't users on your Drupal site? There's a module for that. It's called Access Unpublished, and it was created in February of 2011 by Aberg, though recent releases are by Christian Fritsch of Thunder. It has an 8.x-1.5 version available, which has both security and test coverage. The module has 58 open issues, 17 of which are bugs against the current branch, which is pretty good considering the module is in use by 8,638 sites, according to Drupal.org. Now, once installed, this module adds a new element to your unpublished entity forms for generating links with a special hash value. When generating the link, you can choose how long the hash value can be used for access. Within that form section, you can copy the access URL for any of your generated tokens and then paste that into an email or some kind of direct message. You will need to set a permission for users to access content using the special access URLs, So if you want anyone with a URL to be allowed access, you'll need to assign that permission to the anonymous user rule. The access lifetime can be anything from 1 day to unlimited, in other words, never expiring. And you can set the default value in the settings form for unpublished access. That form also allows you to set the URL parameter that will be used for access, gives you options to modify the HTTP headers on the unpublished page, and has a checkbox you can use to delete all expired tokens. Expired tokens will also be deleted on cron run, and when you delete an entity, any related tokens are also removed. Now, this use case of allowing review of unpublished content for people who aren't users in the Drupal site is a request I hear on a regular, if infrequent basis. So I personally found this module to be really useful. So let's talk about Access Unpublished.
I have to say, this is a unique module for me because I think this is the first module of the week where I first encountered it as a user rather as somebody looking for implementing it. Because this is the module that you use, Martin, to share your blog post sometimes before publishing it, right?
Yeah, exactly. If I've got a topic that I've written about where I feel like maybe there's some controversial elements or something like that, I'll use this as a way to be able to collect some feedback from people I know in the community.
Yep.
So as far as what the click E of that link sees, right? It's just like the page as if it were published, right? They don't have any ability to like edit the page, or they can't get to the node edit form, right?
That's correct. So really, any feedback that you would want them to send, they would probably, like reply to the email or the direct message or what have you. They have no sort of access beyond just being able to view it.
Right.
I feel like the more common use case, though, too, by the way, is the one that I recently asked you about. I asked you what this module name was because I had a client ask for this recently. And the use case was the CEO wants to be able to review content on a site, but they don't want to have to remember a username and password for the site, which this module solves that use case.
Does it work with drafts? Like, can you, if you have moderation enabled, like, can you send them a link to a draft?
Yeah, that's exactly what I've done when I've shared links to unpublished content with folks on this call. So usually, I think actually on my website, I tend to be just unpublished, but it definitely works with anything that's in like a draft or in review type state as well.
Got it.
At Urban, we don't use this module for this functionality. We actually happen to use, this is the first I've heard, it's funny because it's the first I've heard of this particular module. We have located the preview link module, which has 1,500 sites using it, which does almost the exact same thing, except it has a feature, a long feature request that we've had for about 6 months at the Institute, which is they really, really want to be able to have unlimited token length. And what that means is the preview link will expire. I think it's after 2 weeks across the board. And this module that you guys are talking about, you can set that to be unlimited, which is literally what our content production teams want. But almost every piece of content that goes through urban.org, which is about 200 publications a year, goes through a preview link thing where we share it out to researchers, to funders, to all sorts of people that need to see this content and approve it. And we also use it for with moderation turned on. So we're sometimes sharing updates to articles that had some sort of error, and those get approved as well. So I'm going to be trying this module.
I'm also going to be trying this module. I feel like it would be useful on my personal blog, and just realized that I'm actually already using it on a project that I'm working on, and I didn't even know it was there. So look at that.
I took it for a spin because I thought it sounded like a really useful module, and it does have some rough edges. It doesn't, like, you can't save the settings on Drupal 10.2. And that's a long-standing issue. And there's a number of issues that are not really being attended to on there. But it did work for me. I did, and Martin said this, you can't just generate a token. you have to go set the permissions for every content type and every user that you want to be using it. And that's a lot of checkboxes. So I ended up doing a lot of checkboxes, and you can do it for anonymous or for specific roles, but you do have to do it. Otherwise, the token gets you nowhere. But it does, in fact, work, and it is pretty cool.
Interesting. Well, Martin, as always, thank you for another very enlightening module of the week. If folks wanted to connect or suggest a module of the week, how could they go about doing that?
Thanks, John. We're always happy to get nominations for Module of the Week in the Talking Drupal channel of the Drupal Slack, but folks can also reach out to me directly as ManClue on all the social and Drupal platforms.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot.
See you next week.
See you.
So, Josh, let's, before we jump into Urban Institute and what they do, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about yourself. In your intro, you said you've been using Drupal since 2008, Drupal 6. I'm wondering, how did you get started with Drupal, and then how did you come to work at Urban Institute?
I'm really tempted to give you the lifetime story, which includes losing my license when I was in high school because I had a hit and run. But long story short, I went to college for graphic design. Mm-hmm. and wanted to become an advertiser. I wanted to work in graphics. I wanted to work with Photoshop, actually, and jumped into working at a marketing firm straight out of college. And I was a very technical designer at the time. A lot of the designers back in the early 2000s weren't actually using desktop publishing. They were using paper, and they literally laid out brochures on paper and sent them to printers. And that really, I feel like that really dates me because I was the new up and coming tech person into the graphic design. So they put me on website projects, and I was coding my own content management systems, and got tired of that, as you might imagine, and started looking for, frameworks, and found Drupal. Couldn't learn it fast enough, and found a user group in Indianapolis, which connected me with the fact that there were conferences that you could go to. So I went to the DrupalCon in DC, which I think was, I'm not going to even try. It's like 2007 or 2009, somewhere in that range. And I ended up going there, and Drupal was an incredible boon to what I did professionally. And I've been doing it ever since, full time. And while I started as a designer, I'm now, and have been for most of my career, more of a programmer at this point. And I think there's probably a lot of developers that have gone there. And something else, the reason I'm at the Urban Institute is because of a colleague of mine that still works at Urban, which is Farnoosh Johnson. She was mentoring at Mentored Contribution Sprint about 6-7 years ago. And I was also mentoring, and we worked together. We worked a room together. And it was because of that DrupalCon contribution, she reached out to me and said, "Hey, there's a job opening where I work." And I'm like, "Yeah, right." And I applied, and the rest, I've been working now here for 3 years. And I feel like every time I contribute to Drupal, more doors open, which I think is kind of wild.
Were you an agency before that?
Yeah, so I started out in marketing, where just it was one of many hats that I wore. And actually, my very first job, outside of my very first job out of college, but my very first Drupal job full time was with Commerce Guys, and I was working with Randy Fay, who happens to be with us. And we worked together for a few weeks at Commerce Guys. Maybe it was months, but we worked on a lot of really hard projects for Drupal Commerce way back in the day. Wow. And then I went to Acromedia for a while, and now I'm at a non-agency. I'm at an organization, which is totally different.
Yeah, the life cycle of projects is very different when you're working at a at an organization rather than an agency, you can sometimes do more. Because I have clients with both agencies and organizations, and the organizations can sometimes do much longer thinking or planning for projects when you're working for them, because it's just something that you can put in time week after week. Like, you know, the same code base over and over. Like, you're working on the same code base week after week. So there's a lot of benefits.
There are, and it was one of the things I really looked forward to, working on the same stuff. So like the code base for urban.org is something that I look at and work on pretty much every day and have for the last 3.5 years, which is wonderful because you can make quite a bit of progress over the long term.
Yep, exactly. Okay, before we move on to the next question, I just want to really quickly call out for the curious listeners. The DC DrupalCon was 2009, so other people don't have to look that up. Now you've told our listeners a little bit about yourself, can you tell us what the Urban Institute does?
Yes, I've actually thought about this long and hard. So I'm gonna read you what I wrote, and then I'll go a little bit more into it. But the Urban Institute conducts research to understand and address social and economic issues. We aim to provide insights that can improve lives and strengthen communities. So there's that's a lot of words that I'm not sure what that means, right? We're a nonprofit that tries to do data science with funders to help answer questions that policymakers and a policymaker could be anybody. It could be like your local mayor in the US. We're primarily US based. It could be like your local mayor, or it could be your statewide Senate, or it could even be somewhere in the federal system as well, or all the way through, because what the local people are doing can impact you and impact others around you, as well as all the federal levels. So we try to run the gamut and create research that will help answer questions, so that people that are trying to make decisions can make them with actual information as opposed to gut feelings.
Interesting.
So I've been hearing about, the Urban Institute, feels like all my life. Like it's been in the news, and such a study from the Urban Institute, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's very, very famous and very long-standing. It doesn't necessarily come front and center to all of us, but I keep hearing you saying just shorthand urban. Is that a rebranding, or is that just shorthand?
It's something that we do internally a lot, and I primarily work internally. We do have media relations teams, but when we say urban, it's just a shorthand for Urban Institute. In fact, I am misspeaking whenever I say the Urban Institute, because it's technically just Urban Institute with no the. But
so I will very carefully rephrase my next question.
Okay.
What do you do at Urban Institute?
Yeah, this is a fun answer because it's changed quite a bit over the years, and yet it really hasn't. I oversee the web development team, and I manage lots of website projects, ensuring that we use Drupal, primarily that we use Drupal to meet the research, the dissemination. That's the researching term for it. Basically, we use Drupal to get the word out about the research that's available. And we do that in lots of different ways using Drupal. So we have some larger organization tools that are already alive and running and useful, like urban.org or like datacatalog.urban.org. Both of those sites, one of them houses all of our actual data. One of them houses a bunch of research articles that are freely available to everyone but ClaudeBot. And I'll get into ClaudeBot in a little bit, but we have a lot of availability because we're trying to create this funnel, the biggest funnel we possibly can. And the content management system that helps us do that and has helped us do that for many, many years is Drupal, because it allows us to answer very specific feature requests with very, very few licensing fees, and we can still fund projects. We can still work with agencies that also contribute back to the community. We're not here trying to just like suck away all the life from the community. We're really trying to give back. Okay. Which is one of the reasons I wanted to work at Urban too, because they have a presence in the community.
And you mentioned that you work with your team, you help manage your team. How big is the team, and how big is kind of the workload? Like, how many sites do you guys work on?
It's a fascinating question, because it depends on how you look at it, how I would answer that. We have a bi-weekly meeting where we do sprint planning. And I think there's 15 people that show up for that. We're not saying that there are 15 people that directly work under me at Urban. There are only 2 people that work under me at Urban. We have Farnoosh and Anand, and they both work on, the 3 of us work on, I think the Pantheon dashboard that we have right now says there's 33 sites.
Oh, wow.
Not all of them are active. Some of those are frozen things that need to go away. But I would say we probably have 18 active sites. Wow. And 3 or 4 in transition of being upgraded to Drupal 10.
Okay, that still feels like a lot for such a nimble team.
It really is, and you couple that with a bunch of the kind of work that we do too, which is very research based. Those are all the active sites and the ones that are being built. Those aren't necessarily the ones that are also being maintained or upgraded to have different features. Like we have a really cool upward mobility website, just upward-mobility.urban.org, that is a framework for understanding poverty. And the idea is to understand what is happening, how are people in poverty, and less of an economic sense, but more of a holistic sense. And we're adding a dashboard to that, and that dashboard's currently in development. So I can't tell you any more about that, but it's very exciting because that dashboard's going to change, hopefully, how we understand upward mobility, how we can get people at a local level to find the family life, the healthcare, the financial stability to continue to improve themselves. And Drupal's what's doing that.
I just realized something that I probably knew a long time ago. Urban is actually a code word for poverty in the origin of the Institute, right? I mean, that's a shorthand way of saying poverty without saying that.
You know, I've never heard it connected in that way, but I have actually wondered myself, why do we call ourselves the Urban Institute? Because
I'll bet you.
It sounds interesting. I would have to ask some people that have been around a lot longer than me, and there are some people that have been around since almost the very beginning, still working.
I did want to ask you, and you don't have to answer this, but how many levels of approval did you have to get to do this podcast?
I let people know about it this morning. But no, seriously, I did tell my supervisor about a year ago when John and I spoke at the DrupalCon prior to this most recent one, and she loved it. And we're very open-handed and even-keeled about it. And there's a lot of availability that they give us.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and I will put a link in the show notes. So this show actually came out of DrupalCon Pittsburgh, and Josh and some others from Urban Institute did a talk at DrupalCon about kind of how they're using Drupal, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes. But that's where this show kind of came from, and it's been a while in the making, but here we are. So
can I do one more, because I feel like you asked a question I still haven't answered it. How many people are working on it? One of the things to that is we have content production, and content production are the people who are using Drupal but don't code. They don't design, and those are our number one users. Those are the people we are trying to make their lives better every time we get a chance to, my team especially. and we're not doing a great job. We could do better. And if you have more questions around content production, I would love to let you look behind the scenes a little bit of what does an 800-person research team organization need for content production on 23 different Drupal sites, because it's kind of wild.
800 editors.
There's 800 people roughly. It changes all the time, between 700 and 800 people work at Urban. I'm gonna guess it's quite a bit smaller percentage of how many people are actually researchers, but we have research assistants all the way up to like senior fellows who join us for particular research programs. So all the way in between, there's probably, I don't know, 100 different research projects that are going on at Urban at any one time, and each one of them needs to have something done on the websites.
Wow. Well, just jumping off what you said, Josh, because you wanted to jump into that a little bit. What's your number one pain point that you have right now for your editors that you wish you could just solve? Maybe our listeners have a module like Access Unpublished that you just hadn't heard of that maybe solves an issue for you.
The number one at the moment, and oh my, is if I could wave my wand and it would just work, is performance. And that actually brings us back to the thing I kind of talked a little bit about, Claudebot. Claudebot, which is from Anthropic AI, has been hitting urban.org, which is an elite. It's actually higher than elite. There's like multiple tiers of elite at Pantheon. It's an elite Pantheon site. It stays up even when Claudebot's hitting us with 600 requests a minute. But when Claudebot's hitting us with 600 requests a minute, normally we get about 100 requests a minute. So about 5 times our normal traffic sustained over like 72 hours. And when that's happening, our editors cannot click edit and save consistently. They get all sorts of errors. And the reason that is we're using Cloudflare. And Cloudflare only has like global rules about like how long a process can run before it gives up, and it'll cut you off on the front end, but the back end is still saving or whatever. It might have been successful if you could wait for 10 seconds, but it cuts you off with whatever the global value is, I think, is the real problem. But really, honestly, Claudebot, what are you doing? You're killing us. And so what we've implemented is we're looking for Claudebot in the thing, because I don't want to put robots.txt in there. We're not saying AI can't have access to all of our research. We want to be part of the conversation, but we are creating rules that AI bots can only have access. I think it's like 10 requests a minute or something like that. So we're taking them from the 600 that they want to 10.
So if they can't use more than 50% of your capacity.
I would love to be able to write a rule like that. That would be great.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because you think about it like that. We've got a bit of a diversion here, but that's one of the issues with AI. Is no. This is great, but this is one of the issues. Like AI is training on stuff, and some sites want to just block it. They don't want AI training on it. Your institution sounds like you want them to train on it, but they need to do it in a way that's
doesn't take our site down.
That doesn't take your site down, which, even
here's the thing. Here's the thing. It's taking our site down not because they're hitting our pages. If they're hitting our pages, Pantheon's got that cached. Have it all you want. I don't care. But what they're doing, and this is fascinating to me, Claudebot isn't hitting links. What it's doing is it's interacting with the web page and clicking things on facets and interacting with React components that hit API endpoints, and they're flooding us with all of this activity that we never see from bots. Googlebot does not do this. ChatGPT doesn't do this.
And this is a problem that several of my clients are having. It's the same kind of thing. Cloudflare is having trouble blocking some of that stuff too. I think because it's hard to distinguish that from a human other than the volume. But other clients are having issues with massive amounts of traffic just because more bots are more able to interact with the sites more realistically.
Dumb question. Don't AI bots have a user agent string?
They do, which is what we're using to limit them.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean,
But even that was like, there was a typo, and for a while we were letting through 2,400 requests
right.
Actively, and we finally figured that out. So it's, I just want everybody to be nice, because then we could all get along. That would be great.
Oh boy, you and many other world leaders, I'm sure. So refocusing us back to Urban Institute and Drupal. I'm just curious, like, you kind of gave us a little bit of insight as to how Urban Institute uses Drupal, but I'm wondering, you said you have about 33 sites that you're working on. Are those sites, are they all like coupled Drupal? Are some of them headless Drupal? Are they all external? Are they internal? Like, how is Urban Institute using Drupal, like on a daily basis?
We use, that's a great question. We use Drupal primarily as an external publication tool. But one site in particular is both internal and external. It's called Data Catalog. And if you log in to Data Catalog using your single sign-on from Urban, instead of like having access to like 46 data sets, you get access to closer to like 200 or 300 data sets. And that's an example of a Drupal site that's actually running Drupal 7 that gets maintained by research staff and not our content production team. And they have to go in and they add their data and they save it. It's using DCAN, which is, I forget what it's called, but DCAN is a distribution of Drupal that handles data sets and all of that. So the DCAN site that we have works really well. I think it's DKAN. But that's an example of a site that gives us a tool. Basically, we upload it to S3, we fill out a node form, we click save, and it becomes a listing on a site, and then they can link to it consistently from publications and other places where they can show their data and ask people to redo it. But like, to like pull back the curtain a little bit more, we have an entire communications team that has a process where if research is being funded, they're asked to go through this process. And I'm not in the communications department, but that whole department handles, and we work directly quite a bit, that whole department handles like a step-by-step process that includes, making sure they know who their audience is, content strategy, making sure the content production team knows what kind of content needs to be added and where, right sizing the solutions. Like sometimes, a researcher wants a really flashy data visualization, and all they really have is a research article. So, helping people understand how to use our tools is like almost a full-time job in and of itself.
Okay, so you mentioned that you're on Pantheon, and you mentioned you're also using DCAN. I'm curious, are you using custom Drupal upstreams for these sites, or multi-sites, or each one, or using kind of Pantheon's upstreams? What's the technical side of it on the hosting side?
Well, I would take you all into a deep dive. Unfortunately, we don't have the time. The good news is we're using there's no good news here. We use something that is basically a copy of one of our sites that is pretty well feature complete for our purposes, and we'll copy that and create a new site if we need it, to try to keep consistency. What we don't have is upstream, and what we're looking at is really what would it take? What would it really take to get to a system that is consistent? And if there's a bug in one, we can do it. We can fix it in the upstream and bring it in for every site. I think that's the solution. But at the same time, there's another solution that isn't multi-site and isn't just separate sites. and I can't tell you what that is, but I will say that Urban is doubling down on Drupal. We haven't found like a different type of technology, but I can't talk more about it until we launch at least the first one and tell you a little bit more about how that happens. So that's a little bit of a teaser, but we've found a different solution that is probably not a unique way to use Drupal, but it's going to completely change how we do Drupal at Urban.
Okay.
And you may not.
What's the timeline for that?
We're currently in the process of discussing technical discovery, and then we will. We're hoping to launch the first of something by the end of the year. So
Okay.
it's pretty fast.
And so you probably can't answer this question, but the question of the year is how many Drupal sites and Drupal 7 sites, and what are you going to do now?
Yeah, we have 4 of them. We started the year. We started the year with like 12.
Whoa.
Wow.
Or it might have been a little bit less than that, but we've been working on upgrading for about 3 years from Drupal 7. Really, since I started, urban.org was released a year after I started at Urban, but it had been worked on for 2 years prior to that. It replaced a Drupal 7 site. It was the first to replace a Drupal 7 site. And we're very close. But there's the problem that everyone has, which is they're very important websites that we have that have almost no funding. And I don't have a good solution to that, honestly, because we end up with really one of two options for most researchers that need to keep their sites up and live. The first option is maybe the most functional, which is we just pull a static copy and we spend down your Drupal 7 site. We commit everything, including the database, so that we can come back to it. It's basically an archive of the site. And the static site lives on for $10 a year on AWS hosting. But there's no content management. But then again, if it hasn't changed for a few years, what have we really lost? And I kind of want to embrace that more as much as we can, because content management system is really, really good for a site that has lots of content changes. But it's a lot of overhead and expensive overhead, and it hasn't gotten cheaper long-term for projects that really just need their website to talk about information. So the static sites have helped us out a lot.
Yeah,
in terms of cost.
I mean, static sites wouldn't even notice CloudBot.
Exactly. We don't care.
At the levels
that
you're at,
yeah.
if CloudBot was hitting 3,000 times a second, you wouldn't care. You would have to get like upwards of 10K connections a second before you'd be like, "Hey, what's going on? Why is this page slow?"
And to that point, we've also considered, but we have not dipped our toes into the decoupled areas out there. But I'm aware that would solve a lot of our performance issues, because it would decouple the back end from the front end. And it's something that I'm always thinking about and wishing we had the time to really think hard about. But we do have we have a lot of Drupal 7 sites still. Any more than one is bad news. So especially come the end of the year. So we're gonna keep pushing really hard for a static transition of most of those sites.
I will say, as somebody who has spent the last 2+ years working on a massive decoupled Drupal platform, if you have any questions or you want to chat, feel free to let me know.
Awesome.
I was wondering, with 800-ish or so content editors and people kind of like putting information into these websites, are you using like a page builder, like layout builder or paragraphs, or is it simply just like content types with text fields? Like, what does that content architecture kind of look like?
It's so painful, because from a technical standpoint, I wish I could have come in and built this site from the ground up, right? But I'm managing sites that were existing prior to me getting hired at Urban. We have on many of our nodes content types that have I don't know, 25 or more fields, and almost all of them are entity reference fields to different vocabularies. so for using the taxonomy terms to helpfully talk about this content, and we use those taxonomy terms when we're rendering to make different decisions about like what do we render in different fields and that kind of thing. It gets really, it's like a complex web of stuff. On top of that, most of those nodes also use Layout Builder. So we start off with the Layout Builder just out of core, and then we build what we think looks like a good publication page. That's the thing that is put into config export. And then you can modify that if you need to for whatever reason. Maybe you have like a really cool interactive that needs to be a full bleed. That requires Layout Builder. The real challenge we're running into is CK Editor 5 has set us back a little bit. We love CK Editor 5. Don't get me wrong. I think it was the right move. But since they rewrote the whole WYSIWYG, all of our web components, which is what we're using for front-end development, we have lots of custom web components that we use across different projects, not just Drupal sites. And CK Editor doesn't work really well with those. If we're lucky, it shows the custom HTML tags, and if we're unlucky, it just turns it white or something equally annoying. So I have content production team members who frequently will just click source, which is not where you want your content production team to go. Right. I don't want them to feel like they have to click source to edit their content, but they do have full access to Layout Builder. Our entire front end system is built on web components, and those web components have been primarily implemented as custom Drupal blocks that have fields. So you can take an author bio custom block, you can throw it into any node, and when you add it in Layout Builder, you just select which author node and it just renders it. Which is gorgeous, beautiful. It's the way I feel like it's the whole concept of like this modular content system, and Layout Builder has really solved that for us. I'm all eyes and ears on Experience Builder. I'm worried it's too big of a thing, but it feels a lot like the Layout Builder initiative did when they first started, and it's something we use over paragraphs. We do have paragraphs, but we're primarily a Layout Builder
Interesting
group.
I concur with that approach, seeing as it's the one I use myself. So
an interesting thing too about CK Editor 5, because we had the team behind CK Editor 5 on the show. It's been about a year ago, and I asked about custom web components because it's something I'm a big fan of, and
here we go.
Used pretty extensively. And the issue is, the render pipeline is so complex. Like, you just need so much to hook in directly. So one thing I was actually thinking about experimenting with, because I have a new client that had a use case that made me think of this. They're coming from WordPress, and one of the things that they really liked in WordPress was the concept of WordPress shortcodes, which I'm not super familiar with, but they're basically like their tokens. They're custom tokens that you can create.
Right, that render.
Yeah, they render. And their use case is they have some data that they need to show on their site, and they need that data, like say 100 widgets. We sold 100 widgets today. They need to be able to they want to be able to put how many things that they sold in 40 blog posts, but then update that number in one place and have it show up everywhere, right? And shortcodes works. And there's a module for it. There's an API. You can write your own shortcode. It's like a token, and you put that in, and then when it renders, it replaces it with whatever markup you want. So we can basically replace it with just a span that outputs 100 widgets and use a database service call to find out what the actual value should be at render time, right? Works great. But I started wondering about using it for native web components, because, like you said, it keeps them in the CK editor side. They're not going to see the rendered web component, but they don't have to do that whole like switch to source to put it in and not have it be plain text and all this stuff. So I've been toying with that idea. And this is really nitty-gritty development stuff, but it's the kind of thing that I've been thinking about for content editors. Like, how do you integrate that experience in a way that gives them the control, bypasses the render issue pipeline or the render on the CK editor side that currently exists, but still give them the ability to use everything else in CK editor that's nice without switching back and forth. And it seems like a decent use case.
There may be some, and maybe one of your listeners knows this. There may be something like this. My thought was these web components, right? They're all kind of singular directory components. Wouldn't it be nice if there was just a simple way to use that directory to describe to CK editor what this thing is, and it could be rendered in the pipeline, and maybe what it stores in the WYSIWYG isn't necessarily the web component code, like your token idea. It's some version of that.
It's like a media embed or something.
But I really want the form for that to exist in Drupal too. Because I want our editors to click like an author bio that's rendered in their WYSIWYG and have a little screen that says, okay, now select which author you want. That's my dream.
It's kind of like Mercury editor, like a little bit, where you get the rendered front end as the editorial. I mean, I'd say put that in the Starshot channel in Drupal Slack. I mean, they're I think
the other aspect here too, and this is kind of the approach that we've taken, is like the WYSIWYG isn't really the mechanism for building the web components, right? It's simply a mechanism for editing HTML, and then that HTML gets piped out to whatever the component is and placed, right? Because that's essentially what, and Josh, that's why I think your point about like using blocks and then like fields and then populating the blocks with the fields, right, makes a lot of sense. Because like what we've done is we basically said, hey, you have these controls in the WYSIWYG, you can add images, you can style text, you can do all this stuff, but that's basically just HTML that gets placed within, we're using React components, we're not using web components, but that's what gets placed inside the React component on the front end display, right? So, and then actually very topical, through using the Access Unpublished module, we actually have the ability to just click a button and preview that page on the front end. So, I think there are a couple of different ways you could go about doing it. As with everything Drupal, right? There are a lot of different ways you could do it. I knew that Nick would be excited when you started saying web components. I was like, that's
the future. I feel like that is the future. I also feel like maybe we went a little too hard on it, because what we did was we used atomic design with web components. And so all of our headings are a web component, and it just CK editor just chokes on that concept. You can't have an H1 tag. We want you to use LBJ-link. That's funny enough. Lyndon B. Johnson is who founded Urban. Our front end development thing is called Lyndon. So
that makes sense. I would love to have, I don't think this current time is the place for having this discussion, but I'd love to maybe even have a separate meeting with you about this, because this is something that's very interesting to me, and something that I've implemented in a few different places, and I have very strong opinions now. But moving on, you just mentioned that the theme is called Lyndon. You did mention React at some point, I thought, but you said you aren't a headless site. What kind of front end tooling does Urban Institute use for your sites?
We're a hybrid situation where we're rendering web components using Twig, and then using Stencil.js to bring in the styling. And I'm not going to say that I'm an expert here by any stretch of the imagination, but the idea is that we could use Drupal for what it's good at, and use our own. I mean, we have 3 Drupal developers on staff, so writing Twig is a lot easier and more native to us than writing JavaScript. So we tend to focus on the PHP solutions a little bit more, but we find ourselves doing both with web components, because we create a web component that then we have to create a Drupal block as well. So we have Stencil.js running which is just a really light framework that generates web components for us and gives us some ability to bring them in automatically as needed. And we have a big design component library. We have lots of ideas around it. We haven't implemented it correctly yet, but we're moving towards that goal. I think we have 10 sites right now, 8 or 10 sites that use the Linden system. So if we add a feature to one, it goes to all of them.
Oh, cool.
So this is not a loaded question, but what's your preferred local development environment and why?
I have a great answer for you, Randy. By the way, if anybody listening to this didn't know, Randy is the reason DDev exists. I think the best local development environment is the one that works for you, which is a non-answer. But I actually do believe that if it's working for you, you should use it. And whenever we work with an agency, I will always tell them that too. Like, you can use whatever environment you want to use, whatever tooling you use. So we have some sites that have Doxel, we have some sites that have DDev, and we have some sites that have Lando. Interestingly, we have none that I'm aware of that don't use something like DDev on all of our local environments. But at the end of the day, me and my team, independently, before we started working together, we were all using Lando. And Lando has served us very, very well. And there was actually a question that Mike Anello asked on LinkedIn last week, and a lot of people came out. And I think the question was, do you use DDev or Lando? No one even asked about Doxel, I don't think. Or maybe the question was, what do you use? And like 95% of the answers was DDev.
And then there was Josh.
I was the sole, I use Lando and I love it. Like, there's some new features that just happened that are kind of blowing my mind.
So I have to ask the question. You're managing 33-ish websites, right? They're all potentially using different local setups. Like, does that become difficult, bordering on a nightmare? Or is it simply like, hey, you just kind of pull the code and like you set up your local and like you're off to the races?
We couldn't do it without Docker, right? We just couldn't do it. And frankly, we couldn't do it without the M1 processors that came out a few years ago, because our Intel machines just couldn't do Docker on Mac very well.
Yeah.
And now that just the sheer power of our CPUs now on Macs have totally transformed what we can do on my team. And Docker is it went from like a 20-minute to sometimes 40-minute process on like an iMac to I think it clocked in at 25 seconds this morning when I was loading up one of my sites. And I mean, that's wonderful. And every like you said, it is a nightmare because every single environment's different. And we're trying to upgrade to PHP versions. We're trying to upgrade to MySQL versions. And the only way to do it is with Docker.
I'm contractually obligated to mention that on Linux, it's never been more than 10 seconds.
Ouch.
That's right.
Ouch.
Right.
It's so true.
And I'm contractually obligated to mention that on Mac with DDev and especially with OrbStack, it's now right neck and neck with Linux.
Yeah, it's pretty close.
That's why
OrbStack is not open source, but it's pretty close. I did install that, help a client install that recently, and it was really nice.
I will say this is not a DDev show, but I recently moved from Lando to DDev, and I'm using Kalima, and it works just dandy, and it is quite speedy when it comes to doing things. So interesting that the whole local development, like different local development environments, is interesting to me. And I feel like we could probably dive into that, in a whole episode of its own.
I say a little bit more. Yes, it is. The right local development environment is the one that works for you, plus works for your team, plus means that your experienced devs don't spend their whole day keeping the junior devs local development running. So those would be the three things that I would say with a little more nuance.
I think there's one other point too, which is in your situation, Josh, it makes sense that a particular site could have different environments, right? Because you guys can set up Lando on every project, and if you're working with an agency on a particular project, they can set up Doxel, and that's not a huge burden.
Exactly.
But when it's on the agency side, I just appreciate that when it goes the other way too, because on the agency side, some agencies would mandate Lando and some would mandate DDEV and some would, and then, you know, as a freelancer, now I'm having to remember to shut off DDEV before I go to Lando, or shut up, because they don't interact well with each other when they're both running. Over the last few years, things have consolidated on DDEV.
I think.
We did have. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say we did have a show recently about Lando again, and they were talking about some of the plugin architecture that was coming out, and that seemed pretty interesting.
It's really neat, but I like the consolidation too. I mean, basically, I want everybody that's trying to solve this problem to work together, and I don't care what it's called as long as it works well. So I don't know. I think I have to try out DDEV.
Yeah,
it's just so hard to Google Lando issues because you just end up with Calrissian.
You do.
That was my biggest complaint.
Well, so like I mean, from my standpoint, like
lots of Star Wars. Yep.
I like things in like I don't know, in neat boxes, I guess, because like for me it feels like from a testing and CI/CD like process standpoint, like everybody using the same thing would be helpful. But I will say that Lando, DDEV, couple other of those local development environments kind of have integrations into a lot of hosting vendors, so that makes things a lot easier as well to be able to just type a couple commands and get your stuff. We are almost at time here, but we got a couple more questions to go, so I'm gonna move us along. And I'm just curious, we've been talking a lot about Urban Institute, we've been talking a lot about Drupal and how you guys are using it. And you kind of highlighted this a little at the beginning of the show, a little bit, but I'm wondering why Urban Institute chose Drupal, and then you said you were doubling down on it. So clearly, you're very much all in on Drupal. I'm wondering why.
I think there's a bit of a there's I'm sure there's so many analogies here. It's a bit of a train at this point. We've been Drupal for I'm gonna guess about 8 or 9 years at Urban, maybe a little bit more than that. And so we have so much Drupal that it just doesn't make sense to switch to something else.
Sure.
We also have a lot of institutional knowledge at this point too. But primarily, why do we stay with Drupal? And the reason we stay with Drupal is because there's an endless supply. Endless is probably not the right word. There is a very rich resource, both online and professionally, to help us maintain and bring to life about anything we can imagine. And it's this positive feedback loop that we see in other types of research where we're trying to investigate like different ways to understand poverty, to understand social issues. And when we see this mechanism that feeds back into the solution, as opposed to like this mechanism that creates this private enterprise that doesn't necessarily improve everyone equally, we like to like press hard on that easy button as much as we can. And Drupal does both for us. It solves our publishing problems, but it also has this data-driven approach for impact. If you're going to survive in an open source community like Drupal, you have to show up. And how cool is that? Because now you've got a community that shows up and cares about each other, and that feels like something that you really want to invest in as well. And
I imagine there's also kind of like you talk about hitting the easy button. I imagine that it's an easy sell for a nonprofit to say like, hey, there are no licensing fees here. And the cost object is really around feature improvement and keeping things running, as opposed to like, you're just kind of, as you said, giving money to some corporate entity for just being able to use the piece of software. Right.
One of the big things that worked for us at Urban was the Drupal GovCon that was happening many years, and I think it's actually happening soon again in DC. And I mean, there's just a ton of government, federal and state level programs that use Drupal, and it makes sense since a lot of our work is with those types of agencies, to use the same kind of tech that they're using. And the GovCon, if you guys didn't know about it, is a really great free camp that you can go to. It's in DC. It's totally worth the trip. Some amazing people there.
That's going to be August 13th through the 15th in Washington, D.C. And we'll put a link in the show notes to their website.
What's the hardest part of using Drupal as a nonprofit organization?
Yeah. So the real issue with Drupal is it's very similar to what we are as an organization, full of ideas, full of promises, and not necessarily full of funding, right? So there's a lot of dreams that kind of go unrealized with Drupal, and I imagine that's a very vague answer to this problem.
That's a great answer. That's an amazing answer.
It kind of mirrors what we do at an organization level, but it also in bad ways too. But we try to focus on the good things as much as possible. But the real answer here is the hardest thing is making sure that our content production team is served well. Because the content production team are not the stakeholders. They're not the people who are funding the work, but they are the people that have to interact with it all the time. So making sure we get the human element as much as possible involved with our content management system, that's what we're trying to do every day. It's very hard. We don't do it well enough.
That is a great answer. Hey, I know that you do a bunch of data processing and some interactive experiences. What's the most interesting interactive experience you've done? And did that involve, you use DCAN, right, for turning data into interactive things?
We use DCAN to list data for like our data catalog, and it's been a wonderful resource. And I love the idea of having different flavors of Drupal. But what the most interesting thing is something I'm working on right now, and it's for upward mobility. We're creating a dashboard, and quickly behind the curtains, I'll keep it short, but we're building an API where the content is managed on Drupal. It's just a really simple controller that responds with JSON responses. It caches it, and we have different content types for these pieces of information. And the data lives separately in CSV file. We're using Composer to bring in that data on the website. We've got an agency who has built an interactive data visualization that comes in and gets rendered just like our Linden components, but they're getting rendered as a custom block in Layout Builder. So you can go in and add this block, which is a data visualization block, and it reads the API on the Drupal site. So if we want to modify like the name of the thing that's on the dashboard, if we want to change the way the chart gets rendered, all of the fields that we've added to this site are controlling the way the visualization works, which allows us to grow vertically. It's hard to grow horizontally. You can't add like columns of data for data visualization, interactive dashboards, that kind of stuff. But you can get like a really flashy, beautiful rendering of this data that doesn't exist in Drupal, but gets controlled by Drupal. And here's the kick, the real kick. And I can't tell you how excited I am about this because we didn't have the funding for it. But we could build it all using the Drupal API that we're working on right now, with the idea that we could translate it in the future. And since all text, we're talking the labels, we're talking the little information icons, we're talking the different notes of the table that, you know, like when you're looking at the sources and how that changes, all of that is coming from the content management system. So all you have to do to translate this dashboard in the future is add a language and fill out the node forms and call it a day, because the API will read what particular language you want, and you'll have a Spanish version of this dashboard. I cannot wait to see that happen. Very excited.
Well, and when is this feature launching? So that
yes, this year. It's going to launch this year. I'll post about it on LinkedIn and I'll tag you guys.
Yeah, let us know when it comes out, and we'll give it a shout out.
Maybe I'll do a quick write-up on it too, on Data at Urban. It's our Medium blog, and we can go into more technical details of how we got Drupal to talk to a total data visual. It's our first merger that we've done with this data visualization technology.
Very cool.
Very, very cool.
Well, Josh, we appreciate your time and telling us all about Urban Institute and the great things you guys are doing with Drupal. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.
Do you have questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on the Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/tdpromo.
And get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
Thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button in the sidebar. All right, everyone, as we bring this show in for a landing, if folks wanted to get a hold of you or chat more about Drupal, Josh, how could they go about doing that?
I'm on Slack, just Josh Miller, Drupal Slack, just Josh Miller. I'm on X, I guess is what we're calling it. I call it Twitter. It's Mr. Josh Miller. I'm on Drupal.org as Josh Miller. Basically, if it's Josh Miller, you've probably found me. There are other Josh Millers in the community, but I guess I was here first, so I got lucky.
And there you go. Randy, what about you?
I am RFA, RFAY, most places. My favorite place for you to find me is on our DDEV Discord, which is easy to find, but I'm RFA on GitHub and Drupal.org and almost all the places except Randy Fay on Twitter. So I'd love to talk to you. And we're always happy to support you with DDEV on the DDEV Discord or in the issue queue.
There you go. Nick Laughlin, what about you?
You can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out more about EPAM at EPAM.com.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. See you guys next week.
Thanks, everyone.